don't talk to. And especially if you play at Carolina, and I mean, to be fair here, who better is there to ask than Butch Davis or John Shoop, who's worked in the league forever? Like, who's better than who? There's nobody else to talk to on these things. But everything structurally is to create a culture of dependence for players, that they come into a world that is foreign to them, because any college you haven't been to is foreign. And then you drop there, and who do you ask all the questions to? The same people that make all the money. And then they answer everything from there. So I don't really know it in legal terms, but.
And if I could respond to Professor Southall in one further way. Professor, I've become convinced, right or wrong, through this process so far, that the only way to reform the system is not to play around with the process and the procedures, but to fundamentally get rid of the NCAA as it exists today. Deonta made the point that, you know, athletes are not paid. They're essentially unpaid
entertainers.
It seems to me that as long as you have an organization that operates essentially as a cartel that controls the only path to get to the league,
right,
controls, although that may be changing, the bowl system, the tournament in basketball, everything else, where the money comes from, as long as you have that power differential between that organization and unpaid student athletes, the student athletes are going to be abused.
Can I add one thing before we move to the next question? And I think another thing that needs to happen besides the NCAA goes away, these court cases find their way through the courts and we get some case law. I think two other things. One is there must be an organizing force for the players. I mean, we were in the NFL for many, many years, and the Players Association is powerful, and therefore they get stuff done. Number two, I think I would say that after this experience, my eyes are open to the fact that universities need to enlarge their mentality about the value of a football program. It is not just money. It's a lot of money, but that's not all it is. If universities really, really mean that they want to become more multicultural, that they want to increase their diversity, that they want to be a reflection of their state and their community, football is a great avenue to do that. And we have not heard any of that rhetoric in the way that the university has made sense of what happened or what they need to do to fix it. And so I do think that one thing needs to happen is just an enlarged mentality by the universities that football actually does give the university a lot more than just a lot of cold hard cash. There's a lot more that it brings to the community.
One thing I say to Professor Southall, those who don't know, Associate Professor Southall is over at UNC, building a fine sport management program there, is that I'm hoping that we have more Huffstetler out there who will take on these cases, like Marcia Mount Shoop cases, because we know from experience that come August, come July, is the next round of NCAA investigation. One of the things that we're hoping to do with the Student Athletes Human Rights Project is let student athletes know about attorneys out there who are doing the work. There's Christian Denny, who's been doing some work, has a wonderful sports talk blog. So I'm hoping that this notion of taking the NCAA, you have this, it's almost as if we're predisposed with NCAA. There's this cartel, there's this monopoly. Some people call it a monopoly. But if we could take the focus off of them and start to look at the institution in a smaller way, sort of break the game down. Break the game down just a little bit, maybe we have a better opportunity.
How much smaller do you have to put it than people who work and don't get paid?
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, though, we're going to be honest with ourselves. This isn't about us breaking this down. It's not even just that people don't care. It's that people are openly resentful of college athletes. And people are openly resentful of these poor black kids getting to go to school for free. I hear it all the time. Well, I wish I would have gone to school for free. You should have got good at something. I went to school for free. I got 2 master's degrees for free. I was good at something. Why aren't you good at something? If you go get good at something, people pay for you to do stuff. But when you're mediocre, nobody pays. The world is full of mediocre people. And mediocre people are very upset with the idea that someone is getting paid. So when you say that these guys are getting mistreated, like if you want to do something for fun, Google up South Carolina Ladies' Day or Marshall or any of these other places where these boys go on a Saturday afternoon and they basically play It's Raining Men on the stereo, and these boys take their shirts off and stand around in shorts and lift weights while you have like 50, 60-year-old white women standing there and squeezing their arms. And I'm not making this up. You can go find it. It's everywhere. Like, it's not just that the guys are expected to play, it's that you got to show up for this birthday party because such and such, some booster has a daughter that's having a birthday party, and they would love it so much if a football player could show up. It's all these things. People don't care. People legitimately feel as though these guys are getting something that they don't deserve, that these other people wish that they could have, and all they're doing is playing football. So we can try to recontextualize this for people all we want. When we talk about the power and privilege and everything else, there's a lot of people really resentful of the fact that they were never good at anything and nobody will give them anything to do for free.
Yeah. Well, yeah, well, I wanted education coming to school. That was something very important to me. I had the opportunity to leave as a junior as well, but I came back for my degree, ended up getting hurt and all those things, but I still feel like it was worthwhile for me to come back and get my education. But one thing that I did learn is, and I don't want this to sound bad, but I don't believe my education, me having my degree, will be worth more than me leaving and getting paid a high salary, $5 or $6 million at once, and then the potential to keep playing and earning more. I think my earning power as an athlete was far greater than my education. So I wouldn't be, against that idea. Now, if you start that, then everybody's going to go down that road. I think, and it would discourage some guys truly just being a student and athlete because, the more time that you have to get in and put in, the better you'll get at something most of the time. So if I saw that opportunity, I wouldn't be worried about school as much as I wanted my education. I would be worried about getting as good as I could be so I can make as much money as I can be to support my family.
Well, and how realistic is that for most players? I mean, only 2 to 3% of Division I football players make it to the NFL and get to earn those dollars. And even the ones that are good enough, if they get injured or, things can change quickly. So I tend to think that, in a way, the system kind of, we've only been at North Carolina. Other than that, we were in the pros, so we're not exactly pros about college football. But I know at North Carolina that the guys are, there's a full year that they're going to school. They come to school in the summer. They come to school. They're there at school all the time, and so they do kind of already shift things and schedule things so that the season's a little different than the. So I think people are already doing some of that, but again, there's not transparency because everybody's afraid that if people talk about this and it looks like they're not really academically serious or whatever. So it's all kind of like, just the way people do it.
It seems to me there has to be a candid understanding of the system. If you're going to play big-time winning football, maybe basketball, there's a certain percentage of the athletes that you need to bring in who are really going to struggle academically. They may make it through, and it may be a good experience for them, but the school has got to understand that and acknowledge that, I think, as Bomani said, that but for their particular talent athletically, they might be going somewhere else to school, or they might be going to a junior college, or they might be going to the military, but they're going to UNC Chapel Hill because of their football talent, and they're going to struggle academically. And you simply cannot put the demands, whether it's a football player or a women's soccer player, the kind of hourly demands to win. And let's face it, it's about winning. If you don't win, the coaches get fired, athletic directors get fired, alumni don't give as much money. It's the hypocrisy of the system that drives me crazy. That nobody wants to admit how the system really works and why it works. And one of the better proposals I've heard is to give a student athlete 6 years, 4 years of sort of part-time academics, full-time athletics, and then their 4 years of competition is over, and they've got 2 years in which we're going to provide them an education. They're not going to be expected to put in 25, 30 hours on the soccer field, on the football field, or the court. That may work, but it's a cost. Taxpayers are paying for the University of North Carolina. We know what the budget issues are. So,
well, the dirty secret also is the charade is good for business. I don't think that gets brought up nearly enough. Semi-professional sports do not sell in this country. AAA baseball does not sell. The NBA Development League does not sell. Now, are you really going to tell me that Duke could go out tomorrow and beat an NBA D-League team? They couldn't do it. They get spanked. But we don't watch the D-League because we like the charade. We like everything else. Like, it's so part of the narrative is what we sell. We're not watching these games because they're good. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves about this. When's the last time you really watched a college basketball game? It stinks. It's really boring. Nobody makes any shots. Zone defense and everything else. Nobody likes that. I mean, nobody really would watch that. It's almost like if you filmed a basketball game with your friends outside and then go home and try to watch it. It'll put you to sleep, But the charade is what's behind the rest of it, and that's what pushes business. And if you look at the lack of success of semi-professional sports, it becomes clear every day. The NCAA those people running the NCAA aren't stupid. They're perfectly aware that what they're doing doesn't work. I mean, I can't believe that you could go along and get a PhD and look at all this stuff and not realize that what you got is just patently ridiculous. There's no way you could do it. They know it's ridiculous, but this is really what sells, and people get really offended when they find out somebody's getting paid. They really get offended when they find out that somebody's cheating, even though everybody's out. Not everybody, of course. Everyone here is honest, but everybody's out here cheating on these tests and everything else. The charade sells. So every time we start talking about making a substantive change that's reflective of reality, you got to ask yourself whether reality is financially viable. And if it's not, we're gonna keep on pretending.
I think one thing that we have to look at is conference realignment. Those conferences will realign and what their philosophy is. Look at the Big Ten, look at the SEC. And I agree with Justice Orr with regard to the proposal for 4 years, certain type of study, and then 2 years afterwards, because it perfectly makes sense. Because what Mr. Jones is saying with regard to this race is that it's the connection. These college athletics teams could not exist without these large marketing machines behind them, with all the sponsorship behind them, with all the interaction between the athletic success and the alumni donation. All of that is a part of the charade. It's very interesting. Let's get a couple more questions, and then
lady
we're
over
sort
there.
of over time, so we'll get a couple more. I'm
coming at this from the perspective, I'm a mother of a non-resident, obviously, and I understand the discussion based on the need, perhaps, to pay players, whether it's some sort of weird, nebulous per diem or whether it's a salary. But at what point do you draw the line of what college athlete is going to get paid and what college athlete is? Scholarship athlete? Are you going to have to be an athlete with revenue producing sport? And I don't know that this is the panel to bring that up, but that's something to think about. There's tons of college athletes out there. The bulk of college athletes are not necessarily in revenue producing sports.
Right. The only question I always have on that is I've never understood why the NCAA needs to be the overlord of all of these sports that we talk about, the lacrosse, the field hockey, and everything else. They exist because of the revenue generated by the non-revenue sports. And you don't want to be the heartless guy to say, "What, you're not happy just playing your game?" But that's kind of where that goes. But I think the NCAA could get itself out of a lot of that stuff. The reason I say I don't understand why those games need to be supported by the NCAA or those sports, why they can't be local club sports. If you want to play these sports, that's great, but you don't necessarily need to be on television. You don't need to fly across the country and play against all these people, in all these different places. I don't see why schools cannot just do these things on a club level, find the money to support them, and then you can figure out from there how to do it. And once we do that, because if we take all these games off television, I don't think we have any of these problems. I think television is the biggest issue. If you want to like how to clean up the NCAA, take it off TV. You take it off TV, you get rid of the money, you get rid of the incentive for the corruption that you have and everything else, and then you go from there. But that's always the dilemma. I dated a women's basketball player for a stretch, and she's like, look, I go there and I see the check that they get every time we show up to come in. How come we don't get a cut? Because they find money to pay all the coaches and everybody else. And there is no real answer for it because we're not inclined to think about how do you pay somebody that does not generate revenue. But those sports are also requiring the same time investment. There's the same injuries and potential for taken away from your life down the line. And I've never had a great answer for that. It's just so obvious that when you're making the billions off of these guys, that you got to do something for them. But you're right. Then what do we do next?
Yes, sir. We're going to take a couple more and then definitely want to wrap up.
I just got two, one point and one kind of question. First point is, how does the NCAA, how can you defend or reconcile such a system where if the athletes had said, no, I'm up that guy for $500, you'd be better off than I got handed $500 because I made a touchdown. I mean, how can you possibly reconcile that sort of system as far as eligibility goes? And the actual question is, this past National Signing Day, the NCAA had a vote, and now member institutions are allowed to grant multi-year scholarships. And so I think Michigan, Clemson, maybe a couple schools granted their last signing class 4 years guarantee of scholarship. And what was surprising me is the fact that there's an article up on one of the that quotes some coaches in the ACC, and every coach was against the idea. They all were saying, no, this is horrible. How can we give these kids 4-year guaranteed scholarships? And I mean, I couldn't believe it. It barely passed. It was by 2 schools. Out of 308 schools, it was 2 votes away from being shot down. But it passed. So now athletes can, once they commit, they can go for all 4 years guaranteed. And so the question is, what do you think about that? What does it mean moving forward?
That's a tricky ball game because my academic scholarship wasn't 4 years. If my GPA went below a certain level, I got sent home. So if you're a coach, to be fair to them, how do you make sure this cat stays invested for 4 years if he's got a bed and he can kick it for 4 years? What do you do? Like, I don't have an answer for that because I agree that there needs to be more protection for players and they shouldn't be able to just send you out because you're not, as good or they want to bring somebody else in. But how do you get somebody to go for 4 years? If you fall low on the depth chart your freshman year and it looks like you're never going to get up above it, why do I keep going to practice? Like, why do I keep going? Let me tell you what you're going to see, though. These schools that gave those 4 years, you're going to see a whole lot more unspecified violation of team rules or medical red shirt. That's a good one. There's I just want to go to a system that fits better for me. Now, watch. The 4-year scholarship is cool. It ain't going to mean anything in application because it can't.
Look back on everything that's happened with regard to the UNC investigation and some of the other investigations, whether it's South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, USC, Auburn. What can we do from a public policy, legal, social justice standpoint to improve the rights of student athletes with regard to due process? What do you think we can do? Specifically, your discipline, your profession. What can we do? What can we do?
Well, this is a topic that we always talk about. Me and some of the advisors at Carolina, going through what we've gone through. I told you one of my friends that went through this whole process with me wanted to be here but couldn't. But I told him it's important for us to tell our story, for everybody to understand and kind of see things from our eyes. Everybody looks at the national letter of intent as something that's bad, but for us, that's a dream come true. That's how we look at things. So I don't think some people understand the process or the ideas that we have in our head. And for us to kind of openly talk about those things and give that knowledge to them, I think that helps them to maybe come up with better rules or help people be aware of what they're getting themselves into. Because, I mean, when I signed my national letter of intent, like I said, it was the best thing that ever happened to me at that given time, not knowing I was signing away my life. When I say it now, I tell people that. I signed my life away that day. You know what I mean? At least 4 to 5 years. But I think knowledge is power. The only thing that I can do from my position is keep doing things like this. Whenever I'm called upon to talk about it, I'll be there.
Well, and with the experience, the meetings that you had with the guys that you're going through this, is that a learning experience?
It definitely was. And even with some of the administrators at Carolina, because, like I said, they had to put up a front for us, and they didn't know what was going on. After all of this stuff was going on, I came back and talked to some of the people, and they just couldn't believe it. You know, so all the guys now, we still kind of was hit with a hurricane, and still trying to get our emotions kind of back from all of that stuff. Some people are dealing with it in different ways. But it was clear that this affected more than just our athletic thing. Our lives and our legacy, like I said before, was definitely challenged.
Yeah, amen to all that. I mean, our lives have been turned upside down. You know, our lives too. And that hurts. That hurts, and it's very disorienting and very confusing, and very disappointing. I think several things need to happen, that this is a multi-layered problem that needs a multi-layered approach. I think telling the story, telling the truth, and that involves some risk. John and I both realize the risk that is involved in us telling the truth. There's a lot to lose. And people that have a lot to lose might lose. And so I think that's a tough situation, but we're going to be some truth tellers. I hope others will join us. I think people like Joe Nacera, who are reporting in the New York Times about this, going after the NCAA, putting things out there, that needs to happen. The media needs to change their tune and start advocating for the people who need an advocate, instead of just liking dirty laundry and wanting to tell bad stories. I think the other thing that needs to happen, and I've already said this so I won't elaborate, was just that universities must come clean. They must come clean about what they're about, who they are, and if they really are about the things they say and their rhetoric about themselves, then their table of conversation and decision making needs to be expanded to include people like Deontay Williams and Coach Shoop and other people that are invested in these situations, and at the grassroots level, they really know what is going on. The decisions will change if those people's voices are heard.
Well, she hit on Marcia, the biggest thing for my profession, which is, I think Taylor Branch, did this big thing. I guess it was in the Atlantic or whatever publication it was. And what blew my mind about it was not what he wrote about, because I already knew that, but how this very capable and this intellectual didn't realize until right now that something was wrong. And I look around across the board and I talk to people, and they're so conditioned to buy into the idea that the NCAA and all these things are doing something for students that they've never really bothered to stop and evaluate what it is. So a couple of weeks ago, this kid at UConn got caught up in some mom's ex-boyfriend, a car, some relatively small amount of money, like $8,000, because the NCAA makes $8,000 sound like a lot of money. But $8,000 cannot change anybody's life, right? It can make it better for a short time, but it can't change it. And Greg Doyle wrote it, and his whole thing was, I was just like you a few years ago, where I would have slammed the kid for taking the benefit and and everything else. He's like, well, now I've come around and I realize it's the rotten parents' fault. And then the whole thing just came about slamming the boy's mother. And I asked him, I said, Greg, do you know this woman, before you go this far? Because it was like car note, payments on a car note or something like that. I said, do you know this woman? No, but I know enough. That's how backwards we are, that was the I've seen the light sort of moment. And I can't grasp how you could be around this, how you can talk to players, how you can understand the situation, and not recognize what is patently unfair, but people enjoy the game so much to a level that they've never really stopped to analyze exactly what's going on. And I don't think that anything can ever really effectively change with the NCAA unless there's a real change in the mentality and the attitudes of media, because we're the ones that kind of put this stuff out there. And I've said many times that, I mean, somebody's got to advocate for the students, if for no other reason that there's nobody else to do it. I wrote something on Martin Luther King Day last year that it was the whole idea is that King said right before he died in Memphis, the whole idea was, I forget exactly how he put it, but his thing was, if I don't speak for the garbage workers, who's going to speak for the garbage workers? And there's nobody that does at all. We every now and then get a human interest piece where we go back to the rough and tumble neighborhood and we talk about everything that somebody has overcome, but nobody is really about pointing out how the sausage is being made, and every beat writer knows how it's made. That's the disconnect. They're all aware. They all see the facts. We all know who's paying who, what players getting this money to go this place and everything else. But nobody really puts a push to say, hey, man, we just might have a problem. And until that happens, nothing's going to change, because we are probably the most powerful entity in all of this, because we really do frame the way that people see these things.
Is that a function of that story? Is that a function of beat writers or the editors? Because I know one of my mentors, Richard Blackjack, always points out, the demography of the sport.
It's all together. It's all together. Well, everybody's got a role to play in this. It's more dangerous in the internet era, though, with the newspaper, because the newspaper was a completely detached entity. The only sports internet companies that really thrive, the people I work for right now, they don't really thrive, right? But the only people that really thrive are people that have television money behind them. ESPN, Fox, CBS. Yahoo structurally has issues because they don't have TV revenue behind them. And you'll notice that Yahoo's the one that tells on the NCAA and all this stuff at every turn. They're not supported by TV money. It's hard to do sports journalism now unless you have TV money. And if you have TV money, how do you make your TV money? Live events. And what has the greatest inventory of live events? College sports. ESPN's built on college sports. So what's going to happen?
First of all, I think we have to recognize that this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there are certain entities that make a huge amount of money off the system as it now exists. And the solution is not the Band-Aid approaches that Mark Emmert and the NCAA want to throw out. We'll do a little change here and a little change there. It's going to take everybody pushing for major structural reform, which won't be easy. And it will only happen, one, if the media, the national media, decide that the players aren't bad people, but they're the ones who are actually being abused to a certain degree within the way the system operates. But more importantly, it's got to come from university leadership. I have not heard a single university leader step up and say, there were some mistakes made at Chapel Hill, but this wasn't a scandal. And it wasn't a scandal. There were some players that broke some vague NCAA rules, but this was not a scandal. The media made it a scandal. The NCAA, through their shroud of silence, made it a scandal. But the university leadership, the only way reform will ever happen is if the chancellors, the presidents, the Mike Krzyzewskis, they've got to say, this system is fundamentally flawed, and we've got to, at a minimum, start a dialogue about true structural change. Not easy.
I agree with all that. I like what Deonta said at the beginning, that knowledge is power. I think the place to start is for people like Professor Gill to have conversations like the one we're having today, to draw attention, to tell the truth, to be, as Marcia said, truth tellers on these kinds of issues. And it's going to be extremely difficult. I agree that Band-Aids aren't going to work. I'm convinced now that the fundamental mechanics and finances have to change for any real progress to ultimately be made. But, to Bomani's point, I think it was Dr.